As someone who's never had to worry about wearing a V-neck shirt or measuring the length of my shorts with my fingertips, it troubles me how many videos I'm seeing of women talking about the unfair double standards that they face in terms of dress code. So I wanted to try to take a more scientific approach to this whole debate. Take a look at the anatomy of the human eye. Okay, here's your eyeball right there. It's controlled by 6 different muscles. Those are the medial and lateral rectus, the superior and inferior oblique, and the superior and inferior rectus. These 6 muscles are controlled by 3 different cranial nerves and are 100% under your conscious control. Compare that to breasts, which are made of adipose tissue, mammary glands, lactiferous ducts, and a few Cooper's ligaments as well, none of which are under anyone's conscious control. If we're going to base our policy decisions around anything, I vote that we focus on controlling the things that are within our conscious control, not things that aren't. And if you or anyone else doesn't really know where to point your eyes, just remember that boobs and books are just one letter apart. 375 million years ago, during the late Devonian period, one of the most important fish to ever live first evolved. His name was Tiktaalik, and he had some incredible new adaptations that no other life form had developed before. Most importantly, he had big, thick, chunky bones in his front limbs and his shoulders that allowed him to do stuff like push his body up and crawl along the bottoms of the muddy banks. Tiktaalik was technically a fish, but from him, we get every single tetrapod or 4-limbed animal that ever lived, including Ichthyostega, one of the first animals to walk around on all 4s on dry land, all the way up to every stork and horse and python and hamster and turtle and parrot and frog and dolphin and human alive today. Remember, we are not the pinnacle of evolutionary progress. We are just an aberrant side branch of fish that can do cool things like make TikToks. Tiktaalik talk. Tick-tock-taalik.
I'm so tired. I have so much work to do. I was going to try to record a YouTube video today. I've got a mountain of books to read. And I just can't stop thinking about Florida and where it comes from. You see, during the Ice Age, the Pleistocene epoch, the glaciers that formed on the northern half of North America were so massive that, number one, they carved out the Great Lakes and then filled those in when they melted, so that's cool. But then also, they weighed so much that they literally turned the entire continent into a seesaw. And while they were pressing down on the north side, Florida got pulled up from the bowels of the deeps from whence it came. And that's why it's there. So like anytime you hear a news story about a man who converted his homemade flamethrower into a jet engine so he could affix it to his stepmother's jet ski to launch it up some metal siding and disrupt the dogfighting ring next door, that's because of the Ice Age.
This is a carpet shark egg, and we're candling it just like a chicken egg so we can see the little baby shark growing inside. Look at his tiny little fins growing in and his big feathery gills off to the side, still developing. This guy's gonna be so strong and so mighty someday. Not all sharks lay eggs, but those that do usually develop these thick, leathery pouches. And they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they're usually called mermaid's purses. Some sharks like to wedge their eggs down into like crevices between rocks to keep them safe. Some sharks even have eggs that are adapted to look like seaweed, like thick leaves that they can cling to other seaweeds so that they just blow in the breeze under the ocean to keep them camouflaged from predators. Look at this strong little dude. Oh, he's gonna be great.
One of my favorite things to teach about is the transition from water breathing to air breathing, because it's a lot more interesting than a lot of people give it credit for. So you're breathing air right now. That's because about 390 million years ago, some fish evolved some lungs. Super duper cool to talk about all on its own. What's even cooler is that some of those fish kept the lungs, but used them to become better fish by modifying them into swim bladders. That's right, lungs came first. Swim bladders are modified lungs that fish just use to stay neutrally buoyant. And we kept some stuff in the transition too. We kept the gills, and we changed the gills into things like our hyoid bones and our outer ears. In fact, some humans still have what's called a preauricular sinus, a little hole in the front of their ear that's literally a vestigial gill slit, just a leftover breathing hole. And if you're wondering why transition to land in the first place, it's because there's almost 10 times as much oxygen up here on land. It's so easy to make energy up here. And that's why air breathing has evolved not one time, but over 70 different times.
I live in Oklahoma, where it is currently about 14 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 10 degrees Celsius outside, and that's got me thinking about the changing of the seasons. You see, a lot of people think that the seasons change because the Earth is getting closer or farther away from the sun, and that's just not accurate. In fact, right now we're at perihelion, about the closest that we ever get to the sun. At aphelion, the farthest from the sun, that's when it's summertime for me. So here's how it actually works. It all comes down to the length of days and the angle of rays. The Earth is not straight up and down. We're tilted at about a 23.5 degree angle. So here we are next to the sun, but the northern hemisphere is pointed away from the sun. So the rays that are hitting it are coming in at a weird oblique angle. No matter what direction we turn, we're still just having these short, crappy days, but it's nice and warm down here in the southern hemisphere. Then we go to the other side of the sun about 6 months from now. Now the northern hemisphere is pointed right at the sun. We're getting all the direct sunlight, the days are nice and long, and it's winter time down south. I know it sounds weird, but I just want to get farther away from the sun so I can warm up. There is always a great war raging in my comment section about how evolution does or doesn't work, and right now the biggest argument that I'm seeing is the difference between micro and macroevolution, and almost everyone arguing this point is using those terms wrong. Microevolution is the term for small, almost imperceptible genotypic changes within one species. It is an evolutionary change. It's just really tiny. And then we have macroevolution, which is the term that we use for the vast phenotypic evolutionary patterns throughout the whole fossil record, changes from one species to the next. Microevolution causes macroevolution. These tiny changes build up to become bigger changes through what we call phyletic gradualism. Punctuated equilibrium is when you have a big catastrophic mass extinction event followed by rapid diversification and speciation. It's also microevolution, just faster. Anybody who splits hairs with these to try to discredit evolution almost certainly doesn't know what they're talking about. Look at these cleaner shrimp. They're called cleaner shrimp because they like to clean all the parasites and dead tissue off of the fish that inhabit their little areas. Fun fact about shrimp, they display what's called serial protandry, which means they are never born as a female. They're not really born male either. They're sort of hermaphroditic. But early on in life, they act as males, and later on in life, they act as females. Gender means nothing to a shrimp. All they want to do is help out. They just want to clean things up. They're great. Be like a shrimp. You are about to be one of the first people to see something that has been waiting to be seen for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. See, this unassuming little rock is called a geode. They're formed in all sorts of cool ways, my favorite of which being underwater volcanoes, where the outside of the rock cools faster than the inside, or when carbon dioxide and water vapor gets trapped inside a magma flow, creating little gas pockets. Either way, the outside of this rock is really very porous, and it allows silicious water to carry minerals inside over thousands and thousands of years, depositing it into crystal structures. Let's see what the inside looks like. Absolutely astonishing.
Back in 1952, a pair of biochemists named Harold Urey and Stanley Miller did what is, in my opinion, the most important science experiment in the history of our species. They took a big flask and they filled it full of all sorts of chemicals you would expect to find on any early fledgling planet. Things like ammonia and nitrogen and carbon dioxide and water. Then they closed that flask up and let all those chemicals evaporate and condense and then get zapped with electricity a few times over and over and over and over again. And after about a week, they found that the water had become reddish brown and murky. When they opened the flask up and looked inside, they found it was full of amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, which had self-assembled totally on their own. This was the first major evidence for abiogenesis, or how life could possibly spring from non-living material. And it begs the question, if these researchers could do this with just a flask in a week, what could happen if you had a whole planet in like 1 million years?